Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And I just want to send my love to each and every one of you. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. That's if you love a really good story. Don't forget to click the notification and the thumbs up. Let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Sasha. That's not my real name, of course, but for the purposes of this story, that's what I'm going to call myself. I am Native American from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, which is home to my people, the Oglala Sioux tribe. The area where I live is vast wilderness, covered with beautiful valleys, meadows, mountainous ridges, wooded areas, and vast areas of extremely flat grassland, dotted occasionally with clusters of trees. This Indian reservation is about the same size as Connecticut, and there are over 15,000 people living here. And the area does have a lovely small town feel about it, as many of us know each other by name. Our reservation is the second largest in the United States, and definitely the poorest, as about 92% of my people live below the poverty line, and the unemployment here is rife. People battle here to survive the challenges of daily life, as housing conditions are poor, and many people are caught up in drugs, meth, alcohol, gangs, marital abuse, and the list goes on. So invariably we do have a high suicide rate on the reservation when people are driven to the depths of despair and cannot cope anymore, which is incredibly sad. The encounter I'm going to tell you about fits the profile of a real Bigfoot-like creature, but many people on the reservation believe that what was encountered that day was a spiritual being known as the Tall Man. The Tall Man is a taboo subject in my culture that is not to be messed with. It is considered a harbinger of doom, and after a sighting of this creature, there are usually multiple deaths that indeed follow. However, this creature that was witnessed on this occasion was a very physical entity that was clearly flesh and blood, with a very definite thermal heat signature, making it significantly much more dangerous. My story starts on the 11th of March 2006. I was 22 years old at the time and living with my mother in a tiny bungalow next to other similar houses, all identical in appearance. So sadly, our home was neither special, nor individual, nor unique. We lived next to a very pretty creek and opposite a wooded area of natural wilderness. My mother made our home really very cozy, even with the limited finances that we had. She had a natural artistic flair that was always able to turn a sower's ear into a stunning silk purse. So our home was really cozy and inviting, giving the false impression that we wanted for nothing, which in fact was really far from the truth. Life was always exceedingly hard, but I was extremely lucky to have a great education behind me, and both my mother and I were lucky enough to have very respectful jobs in the local town. I vividly recall the day of my strange encounter with such a crystal clear clarity, almost as if it happened yesterday. I do remember it was a very bright, cheerful day, and the ground was still powdered with a thin layer of pretty white snow. Even though it was a crisp, clear, cold, lovely day, I woke up with a strange sense of foreboding in my gut. I really got the feeling that something dreadful was about to happen, but I could not imagine what it could be. I had experienced these ghastly premonitions before on a few occasions and had always been proved right, as many of my tribal ancestors were gifted with the second sight. I knew that I also had inherited similar extrasensory abilities from my family line, so I had these same nagging feelings of inevitable doom on this day, and on the day that my dad died of a sudden heart attack when he was only 35 years old, and another time when my sister had a miscarriage 7 months into her pregnancy. I know on those two separate occasions, without a doubt, that something bad would happen, and those two occasions were among the most oppressive, despairing days of my entire life. I remember feeling that familiar, airy chill all over again on this day, and I racked my brain trying to run through the possible dreadful scenarios that could potentially occur during the day. Suddenly a picture of my 73-year-old grandmother came into my head, and it occurred to me that maybe she was going to die today. I mean, what else could it possibly be? Only recently she'd been complaining of having heart palpitations. I immediately got dressed as quickly as I could to go and visit my grandmother at the Pine Ridge retirement home. I knew I needed to say goodbye to her if she was going to pass away, and I wanted to be there for her. I got into my car and made the journey, hoping with all my heart that my grandmother would not die before I got there. That was how confident I was in my premonitions. I arrived at the retirement home to find my grandmother with a pink glow to her face and looking healthier than I had seen her look for a very long time. She was laughing and joking and in unusually high spirits. "Hi, Gran," I said, taking her into my arms with a huge hug. "I love you so much." My grandmother looked surprised. "It's unlike you to be so emotional. What's up, dear?" "Oh, nothing," I said. "I just don't tell you enough what you mean to me, that's all." "Well, dear, that's very sweet of you to say that. I never thought I'd be seeing you today. Why are you not working?" "I phoned in sick," I said. "I wanted to make seeing you today my top priority." My grandmother looked pleased, and then I finally asked her the awkward questions about her health that she rarely ever wanted to discuss. "How are your heart palpitations?" I asked her. "The medication is working well, dear, and the doctor says my ticker is in very good shape, and my blood pressure is almost perfect." As you can imagine, I was surprised to see there were no signs that my gran was about to pop her clog, so to speak. But I knew that people did sometimes suddenly just pass away without any rational explanation. So I decided that I needed to stick around with my grandmother for a little longer. Later in the morning, my grandmother took me to the television room to watch her favourite soap on television with some of the elderly friends. The television soap came on, and all eyes were glued to the screen. And that was when strange things began to happen almost immediately. I noticed in my peripheral vision a movement coming from the window that was 9 feet off the ground, and I could sense that something or someone was watching us and peering in at us. Whatever it was, it felt very dark and sinister and sent shivers of dread down my spine. I turned my head towards the window and saw this black, hairy humanoid form with a very large face staring in at us. I could not see the face clearly because all the features seemed distorted, and the face was very black. Almost it was like the area of your television screen that suddenly goes incredibly fuzzy. The sinister dark eyes were not clearly visible to me, but I did feel the penetrating, hostile gaze. I could hear fearful cries as the terrified elderly ladies cried out in horror. Some were crying, others were pointing at the window and gasping, with jaws dropping to the floor and terrified eyes as wide as saucers. One of 2 of them let out the most horrifying shrieks that caused the retirement nurse to come running into the room. "What's going on? What's going on? What on earth is going on?" When she saw the massive black being at the window, she started shaking like a leaf and trembling violently like a very wobbly jelly. Her terrified demeanour did little to calm down the ladies that were becoming increasingly frantic by the minute. Finally, the nurse was able to gain some composure and calm everyone down, and then she called the police. I stood there watching everything that was going on, and it felt as if I was out of my body, watching a terrifying horror on television that was so gripping that I had become a part of it. It was that surreal to me. The creature started to move away from the window as the sounds of police sirens approached ever closer. I went over to the window and watched the humanoid creature gliding away gracefully. And truly, he was faster than a cheetah and equally as agile. And then he finally just vanished from my sight. I could hear the police sirens stop, car doors slamming, and the concerned voices of officers. Then there was the commotion from the old ladies chattering excitedly inside the television room with horrified voices that registered both fear and yet extreme curiosity. "What was that? What on earth was that? What was that? Did you see it? It had such a big black face. What was it? What was it? What if it comes back?" wailed another. I tried to calm everyone down while I watched all the proceedings from the window. I noticed the nurse pointing up to where I was standing. She was chatting to the police officers very earnestly, with an intense, fearful expression all over her face. The police officers were nervously clutching their guns on their sides while they walked around the premises cautiously, as if half expecting to run into the strange creature. After they inspected the premises thoroughly, they continued to chat and finally got back into their vehicles and drove away. The terrified nurse came flying into the room, reassuring everyone in a nervous, high-pitched voice that the very strange creature had gone and there was no sign of it anywhere. "It's all right," she said. "It's gone, and the police assure us that they'll routinely check on us throughout the day. I'm sure it won't be coming back. The police think it's possible it could have been kids playing a prank on us." "That was no prank," cried out one woman. "Whatever that thing was, it was real." I knew the lady was right. The creature I'd seen was covered with raven black, bedraggled-looking hair from head to toe. It had a very large torso with willowy, long, slender arms that could have touched the ankles, they were that long. The creature was 9 to 10 feet tall and easily 800 pounds without exaggeration. I do not know what the head looked like or the face, which was a little frustrating because it left me with more questions than answers. What was this thing, I wondered? Maybe I would never get to know. As the day retreated and darkness made its presence known, the night seemed airily still and quiet as the chorus of crickets and frogs seemed to have no desire to engage in their musical song. An awkward heaviness enveloped the air with oppressive energy that seemed to snake itself around the residents in the Pine Ridge community that were sensed by everyone. Even the dogs would pace around their yards with nervous strides, and they could be heard barking, howling and growling throughout the night, unsettling the residents who were having extreme difficulty in getting to sleep, because they too sensed that something was seriously off. Suddenly the police station was inundated with 911 calls from residents who had experienced brief sightings of this exceedingly tall humanoid being that seemed to gallop through their yards on its long legs, leaving any onlookers feeling totally shaken with terror. One resident assured the police that if the creature came close enough to him, he was to shoot it dead, and that was for certain. The police chief, who was a Native American at the time, was called out from his cosy evening at home with his family and kids to investigate the plethora of 911 calls received at his station. The reports of this mysterious beast, whatever in God's name it was, kept streaming in from worried residents. He was convinced that the creature was a supernatural being known as the Tall Man, a harbinger of doom and a messenger of impending death. As the chief and his partner drove the vehicle into the centre of town, their glimmering flashlights caught the sight of the hairy humanoid 10-foot creature crossing the road. It looked in at them directly through the car window. The police were utterly terrified and could hardly believe what they were seeing with their eyes, and the hairs on the back of their necks stood up on end. They kept saying to each other, "What the heck is that? What the heck is that? I've never seen anything like that before." The creature possessed a powerful, formidable presence and roared at them like a lion, and it waved its arms like an octopus. It was difficult to see the dark face clearly, as the features of this creature were obliterated by the darkness and were not clearly distinguishable. It was with astonishment the police found that this mysterious, strange creature had a very strong heat signature. So whatever it was, this thing was a physical being, and there was no doubt about that. They watched it running away with enormous strides and with incredible grace, and then it disappeared into the pine woods close to the houses on the other side of the creek. The police were in hot pursuit of the creature, communicating with each other on very inadequate walkie-talkies at the time. They saw the creature racing towards the creek, and they watched it finally disappear from sight, and then it was gone. As you can imagine, for weeks after the strange encounter, those who had witnessed the mysterious humanoid creature were divided by what they had actually seen. But in my culture, we do not like dwelling on encounters like this. Many of us are seriously superstitious by nature and do not like talking about such things, so we tend to keep our mouths shut. Sometimes I wonder if the creature was a Bigfoot at all, but I will never really know what it was. But I know this, it was real. It was breathing, it had a pulse, it had a heartbeat, it had a physical energy and a strong presence. Whether something physical could also be supernatural at the same time, I do not know. But I know this, again and again I will tell you, this creature was real. I do not believe there were any major deaths in our area after the sighting of the so-called tall man, but where I live we do have a relatively low life expectancy, and I believe it has a lot to do with the hopelessness many youngsters feel about their futures. With poverty, drug abuse and alcohol addiction, there are people in our community who invariably die from the complications of these diseases. I do not believe these deaths ultimately have any connection to the tall humanoid that was seen on that cold, crisp March day in 2006. I believe my premonitions on this March day were related to the strange humanoid that I was to see. Luckily, my grandmother lived for another 10 years after this incident, much to my delight. Living on the reservation, there have been strange sightings in the area that we cannot explain. On 2 occasions I have seen the apparitions of 2 elders in my tribe who died over 100 years ago, and they were riding large black horses and thundering across the valley in their tribal regalia. I was astonished to see them because it was the first time I'd ever seen a ghost in my entire life, but they did vanish before my eyes. I was asking myself if I had really seen what I thought I saw when I noticed my mother standing beside me. "Did you see them?" she asked me, stroking my mane of black hair affectionately. I nodded. I did. "They'll be back," she said, "possibly in a month or so." "What do they want?" I asked. "I'm not sure," she said. "I think they're looking out for their people." I smiled because my people rarely need looking out for. You know that too. One day something really strange happened. As I told you, we have a very high suicide rate in our reservation, and one day a young 16-year-old kid killed himself, and his poor mother was beside herself. She was so devastated. I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink, and my mother was drying them, when we saw the ghost of the boy who had taken his own life. He was wandering around the creek area close to our home, and we had a great view of him from the kitchen window. He almost looked as lost as he had been in life. I think he was surprised to find that he still had a consciousness after death. He possibly thought the gun he had used on his head would obliterate his existence, and was probably hoping it would, I imagine. He was wearing the same clothes that he was found in, a beige pair of trousers and a blue and black plaid shirt. You could tell he was a ghost because his body looked like a photograph that is a little out of focus and a lot less bold in colour. Suddenly we heard the sound of horses' hooves across the valley, and we saw the ghosts of the 2 elders on horseback. And as they cantered across the valley, they lifted the dead boy onto the horse with them and cantered away. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. It looked like they really were looking out for the people after all, and taking this poor lost soul to a better place. I was so happy for him. I told the boy's mother what I had seen to comfort her, and she said her boy had come to her in a dream that night, riding a black horse, telling her that all was going to be fine. The poor mother seemed so comforted by the experience and also by what I had told her. Maybe the 2 old elders on the stallions helped the people who die on the reservation to cross over. I don't know, but I thought these accounts would be of interest to you and your listeners. And, well, I just want to say that story is absolutely fascinating, and I do not know what you encountered. I just find it extraordinary because Bigfoots do tend to have very big arms, and this creature had very slender arms, and you couldn't see the face at all, nor could you see the eyes. But on the other hand, this creature was covered all over it with hair, and it was a very physical being. So could it be supernatural as well? I truly don't know the answer to that question. But I do know this. That is a fascinating story. And I am very sorry about the poverty that is in your reservation. That must be just so heartbreaking, the challenges that you must experience on a daily basis. It must be really tough for your people. But I did love the story of the elders coming to collect the poor lost soul. What a wonderful story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.